Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Week 1 wrap-up, highlight reel, summary, whatever you want to call it, of Littlewargame's Pro League 6. It is time to go through all the teams, all of the days of action, all of the series, and see whatever happened to get to where we are today. So without any further ado, let's get into the results of game number 1. Heavy in the first game decided to go for a massive offensive push, creating multiple wolf dens, and with a massive push into the natural base of Avocado Lord, he would eventually take game number 1. And in game number 2, he went for the exact same thing. Fewer dens, but same pressure. He went for another attack on Avocado Lord's base, but this time the wolves did not cut it, so he switched to some mechanical units, and this placement of all the catapults will tell you enough, because Heavy did take game number 2, getting him a 2-0 lead versus Avocado Lord, and putting the Fellowship on the top of the score sheets. The first game of Group B started with Slammer 4 versus Weird Rat, Slammer deciding to go for a proxy Dragon Lair. Slammer would eventually win the game with a large beast push, keeping Weird Rat contained, but the dragons did not do it on its own. In the second game, Slammer decided to continue the pressure with some catapult drops. However, it was not enough, as Weird Rat was able to surround the entire army and take it down in the endgame, getting it to a 1-1. And with the score equalized, there was once again a massive surround from Slammer on the army of Weird Rat. It looked like Slammer was going to be able to take the 2-1 victory, getting the catapults as well, but Weird Rat with his undying archers would eventually go ahead and break into Slammer's base and take the 2-1 lead. This 2-1 lead did mean that the Fellowship was still on top, but Team Holy was coming straight after them. Game number 2 in Group A would be Bisherm versus Negat. Bisherm, getting an aggressive start, would eventually take game number 1. In game number 2, Bisherm also looked to take the victory with a massive push into the base of Negat, but he himself was going to take down Bisherm from behind. Eventually, some dragons came in from Negat. He would lose quite some to the ballistas of Bisherm, but it was not enough, and Negat won game number 2. In game number 3, it would be Negat risking it all, going for a workshop opening. Bisherm, realizing that, immediately goes for 3 bases and ends up going into a massive overhaul of his army into 4 dragon lairs. At the end, the dragon count would be too much for Negat to take down, as there would be 12 dragons in his base, leaving Bisherm to take the series 2-1 and increasing the lead for the Fellowship. The Pro League, however, did manage to get on the scoreboard. The second game of Group B would be Glaba versus Hydra, with the first one going for an early attack. The watchtower, however, from Hydra would be too much for Glaba, and with the deficit he would be in, GG'd out. In the second game, Glaba would once again have the upper hand. However, this massive push that you can see now did manage to get pushed back by Hydra, and with him trying to secure a lead on his own, getting himself some breathing room, managed to go ahead and do a counterattack, having some great movement with his archers. But at the end, it was just not quite enough, and Glaba would take game number 2. In game number 3, Glaba saw what Slammer did, and he was going for a dragon spot himself. Went unscouted by Hydra, which would result in the end of a massive flock of dragons taking down the counterattack of Hydra, just not able to take down the third base of Glaba. And with that, with the deficit, it was too much for Hydra, and Glaba this time would take the 2-1 victory, once again pushing Team Holy a little bit further in the way of the Fellowship, and it looked like it would be a close fight for first place. Game number 3 of Group A would see Joshua09 versus Matthew, and Joshua going for an early aggressive attack would be held by Matthew though, but in the end the overwhelming force of Joshua's would lead to a 1-0 victory. For game number 2 would see Joshua's taking a massive expansion streak, even going into the map area of Matthew himself, while being contained, would try and get some counter-offensive in, take down the entire base of Joshua's, but he himself would have so much map area to keep expanding. With a final hold, he would be able to take the 2-0 lead, and once again put the Fellowship further and further ahead. Game number 3 of Group B would be Holy versus Amdurg. The team leads themselves. Was a massive attack from Amdurg in the mid-game, but the Holy managed to actually defend this quite well, which led him to decide to do a counter-attack. Amdurg, however, was ready with all of the catapults and actually countered it quite well himself. And with the entire force behind Amdurk here, he would manage to eventually get game number 1 into his favor. Game number 2 would see Holy get the early map presence as the wolves would surround Amdurk all around. There was nothing that Amdurk could do really in the early game, but in the end, Holy with one bad engagement would get his entire army clunched up by some archers and werewolves, getting rid of the entirety of it. Once again, with another dragon switch in the mid-game here, it would result in a 2-0 clean sweep from Amdurk, getting themselves into second place, fighting for that second place spot while the Fellowship looked like they would run away with it. Back to Group A, it would be Satocaster versus its J. Satocaster getting an early aggressive position, but it would be held by its J, who in turn was going for some catapult drops, trying to do some economic damage. It did not really happen though, as Satocaster would eventually manage to push around and counter all of the counterattacks that its J would have been doing. With action all across the map in this series, it was great to watch, but eventually game number 1 would go into Satocaster's favor. In game number 2, we see its J going for a workshop opening, which we so far have not seen working that much. And you can see it here with some bad movement. Its J got his Gatling guns all caught and they would be cleaned up by Satocaster. The game would continue to go on for quite a while, but Satocaster going with a mech switch himself, getting his catapults already and taking down entire gold mine lines, would eventually take the 2-0 victory. And with that victory, the Fellowship would extend their lead in first place in week 1, leaving a tough road ahead for the other teams to catch up. But their Steph and Beatflitz do not care. They battled each other to the end here. An early watchtower supported push from their Steph was held relatively easy by Beatflitz, causing their Steph to try and go for a hidden third base to get an economic lead unbeknownst of Beatflitz here. Also, their Steph taking down the third base from Beatflitz would eventually try and get in there with a werewolf switch. Their Steph, however, would get himself a number of werewolves as well, but with the hidden third base, get himself an economic lead, get himself plenty of upgrades, which means that his werewolves in the end would be just so much stronger, allowing him to take game number 1. Game number 2 would see their Steph walling himself in, and after Beatflitz scouted that, he would go for a fast third himself, knowing that their Steph would be stuck. The Steph would go for catapult drops, and with the bad planning ahead of Beatflitz here, would lose his house and his snake charmer to these drops, pushing him behind a little bit. But Beatflitz does not care that some of his buildings are taken down, because he can just continue to make the units he wants and drop them straight into the base of their Steph and say, what you can do, I can do. And he would manage with this drop play take game number 2 back into his favor. And with that 1-1 score, it would all be up to the third game, where their Steph would decide to go for the 3-den opening. This 3-den opening though would be held by Beatflitz, and from the point where their Steph would also lose all of his wolves in a skirmish in the middle of the map, did put him far and far behind, and allowed Beatflitz to roam around freely. Beatflitz, however, would focus on the third base of their Steph instead of going immediately for the gold workers, allowing their Steph to create some army which would eventually push back Beatflitz. But with the deficit of a player in the red and a nice attack taking down the main of our player in the red, Beatflitz would eventually be able, with multiple pushes one at a time, take down their Steph, getting a 2-1 victory for his team. Continuing the momentum turnaround that Amdurk has set into this group, and once again slowly securing themselves into place number 2. At day 5 of week 1, it was tragic to see that Ninja vs JP would not be played, as there were some scheduling issues, resulting in a 2-0 score going for the Fellowship. No bonus point for the clean sweep, however. Which leaves J Awesome and Bly last but not least, as Bly would go for a hidden werewolf den, and with a slow continuous werewolf push would eventually take down J Awesome to get himself in a 1-0 lead. Bly in game number 2 tried to keep some pressure on as well, getting some catapults into the main base, and on the right hand side you can see another dropship with wolves dropping in as well, keeping J Awesome on his toes. J Awesome would go for a counterattack, taking down the 4th base of Bly though, but it would be too little too late, as Bly got an entire switch into gyrocrafts. With not enough units to take the air support down, Bly would take the 2-0 lead once again getting Mderg in a more and more favorable position. Which means that at the end of week 1, this is going to be the score. The Fellowship is in first place, followed by Team Mderg, chasing them slow but steadily. Team Holy in a solid 3rd place, and Team Pro League last. And once again, I have to say last but not least, because it is far from over. It's just week 1 of 3. So let's get ready and see what the teams can do and cook up for week number 2.